Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing really well. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make these gorgeous cottagecore inspired crocheted wall art, including a toadstool, a branch of blackberries and a sleeping deer. These all have very delicate frame edges around the outside, and this is definitely a beginner friendly project. I'm also going to include the cross stitch designs as well, but today I'm going to be doing the pixel grid method. So let's just get into the tutorial. Okay, so here are all the yarn colours I'm using. This is all double knit yarn. I'm using black, cream, light brown, dark brown, green and a little bit of this red. And I would say for each colour you would probably need at maximum 25 grams. So you really don't need a lot of yarn for this project. And I'm going to be using a 2.5mm hook for this project because I want my stitches to be nice and dense and I want the image to kind of come out as clear as possible. And then you're also going to need some scissors. And after you've completed each of the prints, you're going to also want to decide on an extra colour or any of the colours you've already used for the border of the frame, which I'm going to get into right at the end. So if you want a contrasting frame, for example, if you want to make it look gold, then you could use quite a warm yellow for the frame, if that makes sense, or a dark brown if you wanted it to look like a wooden frame. So the first project that I'm going to be working on and explaining the graph section is going to be the deer, because this is probably the easiest one out of all of them. I'm also going to include the cross stitch graph for the deer because I designed it a little bit differently for cross stitch. It just includes a little bit of half cross stitching to create a little bit more of a realistic effect. So the crochet version is definitely a little bit more blocky, but you can always outline certain areas of the deer to make it look a little bit more realistic with some embroidery thread, but I'll get into that later. So just so you know, if you're doing a cross stitch version, you can refer to that graph in the description, and then the crochet version is obviously going to be the one that I'm going to refer to for the actual tutorial. And the cross stitch versions for the other prints are the same as the crochet version, so there's only one version of those. So for the crochet graph, I am going to be chaining the width, so the longest part along the bottom, which is a total of 15 squares. And then the height, which is going to be how many rows we do, shows on the graph that is 8 squares in height, so we're going to be doing 8 rows in total. For cross stitch, I explain this in quite a lot of my other tutorials, which I'm going to link because they are going to go into a bit more depth. But your cross stitch ones are either going to be on like Ada that you've got yourself, or you can crochet kind of like your own Ada by basically chaining up the height of the graph and working across, and then you can cross stitch your design on top of that panel afterwards. So you basically just want to make like a rectangular panel, chain up the height, and then do as many rows as how many squares there are width wise, if that makes sense, so 15. And then you've got a flat panel that you can just work on top of with your needle and thread. Like I said though, I'm doing the crochet version, so this one I'm going to be working along the width, and I'm going to be going upwards this way, so I'm going to be doing 8 rows of this. So our first row is going to be nice and simple. I'm just going to make a slip knot with my background colour. You don't have to use cream for your background colour, but I just wanted to. And then take your hook, make a slip knot, and then you want to chain the amount of squares there are horizontally across the bottom, the width, which is 15, and then you want to chain an extra one of those for the turning chain. So in total I'm going to chain 16. Okay, so once you have your chain, you're going to flip the chain upside down to work in the back bumps, because this is going to give you the neatest edge and it's going to allow you to crochet into actual stitches later on when we do the frame. So flip your chain over like this so you can see these bumps going across the back, and where your second chain is, find that bump right behind that second chain and insert your hook. And you want to make a single crochet. So you'll insert your hook into that bump and you'll yarn over anti-clockwise and then pull through that bump, and then you have 2 loops on your hook, and then yarn over a final time anti-clockwise and pull through those last 2 loops, and that is your single crochet. And then you're going to want to insert your hook into the next back bump. We're going to do the exact same stitch. We're going to do a single crochet, so yarn over anti-clockwise and pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over again anti-clockwise and pull through those 2 loops like that. So now we've got 2 single crochets. And I'm just going to continue this until the end of the row, and by the end of the row you're going to have 15 single crochets. Okay, so this is what it should look like once you get to the end of the row. So I'm now going to start my next row. Now because I'm left-handed, I work from left to right. As you can see, I keep my hook in my left hand and I work across this way, which means that the end of my row is on the right side of the work. If you're right-handed, this is going to be the opposite. You're going to hold your work in your right hand and you would have done your chains like this and worked across, and now you've ended up on this side. So technically, if we're looking at the graph and you're right-handed, you're going to be starting row 2 on the left side of the graph and you're going to work back across. So I'm left-handed, so technically now my next row is going to start on the other side of row 2, and that is going to be worked from right to left if you're looking at the graph visually. So my first lot of stitches are going to be 4 single crochets in my background colour. If you're right-handed, this is also going to be the same, so we don't need to worry, but following the rows up, we're going to be finding some differences there, but don't worry, it's all the same thing. It's just that we're going to be doing the pattern at opposite ends, if that makes sense. But everything you need to know will be in this video. So for row 2, I'm just going to chain 1 and turn the work. And like I said, I'm starting row 2 from the right side of the graph when I look at it. If you're right-handed, you'll be starting on the left side of the graph, and when you're looking at it, and you'll be working from left to right technically across the graph. So when you look on the graph, you've got your brown stitches in the centre, and on the second row, which is the second row of squares going across horizontally, you've got 4 white stitches either side of those brown stitches where there are 7 in the centre. So 4 cream stitches for me either side and then 7 in the centre. So I'm basically going to be doing 4 single crochets in my background colour, and on the 5th I'm going to switch to light brown, and that is the same if you're right-handed and you're going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to start off with 3 single crochets and then I'm going to show you what we do on the 4th. So just start in that first stitch of the row and make your single crochet, and then do 2 more. Like that. So now we have 3, and now I'm going to start my 4th. So I'm going to insert my hook into that 4th, I'm going to yarn over and pull through, and then I'm just going to put the work down for a second, and I'm going to grab my colour that I'm going to use for the deer, which is going to be light brown. I'm not going to do a slip knot when I attach my colours because I'm not kind of too worried about it coming undone, but if you want to make it extra secure, you can make a slip knot before you start attaching it, because that's your preference. So I'm going to just basically pull through those last 2 loops with my new colour, and this is going to allow us to finish that 4th stitch in cream but have our loop ready for the next stitch in light brown. So I'm going to yarn over. Technically I'm just wrapping the tail of the brown yarn over the hook. If you did a slip knot, you'll just be placing the slip knot on the hook, and then you're just going to pull your slip knot through those last 2 loops. So now I'm just going to work my 7 single crochets across in light brown, and for this pattern in particular I'm going to float the work. What I mean by that is I'm just basically going to allow the stitch to drop at the back, and then when I need it later I will pick it up, so I'll just let the work float along the back like this. You don't have to do this, you could weave your work you could weave your ends into your work as you go, however I find that this creates a little bit more bumpiness in the stitches. So if you're not too worried about how the back of your work is going to look, then I recommend doing the floating method. If you are worried, then I would suggest you keep a really close eye on your tension when you are weaving your ends into your work, making sure that they're all even and the stitches aren't being bulky or anything like that. And if you're finding that you really just want to have the neatest work possible and you don't want to weave your ends in, then I definitely suggest doing the cross stitch method instead, because you're not going to have any of those issues. So I'm just going to do my 7 single crochets, and on the 7th I'm going to switch back to cream because I need to do those last 4. So I'm just going to insert my hook and do 6 single crochets, and then I'm going to show you what I do for the 7th. So I've done my 6 single crochets in brown, and now I'm going to do my 7th, and I'm going to switch back to cream for my last 4 stitches. So I'm going to insert my hook into that next stitch, yarn over and pull through, and I'm going to drop my tail to the back of the work, because row 2 will always be on the back of the work. All your even number rows are on the back of the work, and all your odd number rows are on the front. So when you're on an even number row, try to keep your tails on the work facing you. Pick up your original colour that you had stopped over here and just kind of drag it across the back like this. You're just floating it across, and then you can just hold it there with your thumb and then yarn over with that colour and pull through to finish the stitch with your new colour. I'm just going to drop the brown to the back, and I'm going to complete my last 4 single crochets here in cream to finish the row. Okay, so that is our second row complete, and now we're going to be working on row 3. So for me, I'm going to be starting from the left side of the graph, working all the way across to the right. If you're right-handed, you're going to be starting from the right hand of the graph and working all the way across to the left. So we're going to be doing different things at different times, but it's not really too much of a difference. You just need to pay attention to what's on the graph, depending on what hand you use when you crochet, and then just read the graph carefully and do the stitches as they are on the graph. So chain 1 and turn your work to start your next row. And my first 4 stitches again are going to be cream. If you're right-handed, your first 3 stitches are going to be cream, and you're going to switch to brown on the 4th. So I'm just going to start my 4 single crochets. So my 4th one is where I switch to brown. So I'm going to drop the work to the back, pick up the light brown yarn, and finish the stitch with my light brown yarn. If you are right-handed, you would have done that on your 3rd stitch, so you would have done your 2 single crochets in cream. On the 3rd, you would have started the cream single crochet and you would have finished it with brown. Okay, so I'm now going to start the next section, which is going to be the transition from brown to black. So I'm going to do 2 single crochets in light brown, and on the 2nd stitch I'm switching to black. If you are right-handed, at this point you are going to do 5 single crochets in brown, and then you're going to switch to black on the 5th. So I'm just going to start my 2. So that's the first, and then I'm going to start the second like that, and I'm going to drop the yarn. I'm going to pick up my black yarn, and this is literally just for 1 stitch, so we really don't need a lot. We can probably cut this after we finish the stitch. Just loop it over your hook and pull your new colour through that stitch like that. So now we've got a 3rd colour involved, and this colour is actually only going to be used once, so this is the perfect opportunity to show you how it works when you only need to do 1 single crochet and switch back. So essentially you would just be doing what you did before when you switched colour. Insert your hook, yarn over and pull through, drop your yarn and pick up whatever colour you need next according to the graph. So for me, light brown, and finish the stitch with your new colour for the next stitch. And you can see that you're still completing that stitch in black. It's just making sure that your next stitch is ready for the next colour. So now I've done that, I'm going to complete the rest of the brown section, which is 5 single crochets. If you're right-handed, you'll just be doing 2 and then switching back to cream. So I'm about to start my 5th one, inserting my hook, yarn over and pull through, dropping the brown yarn, and I'm going to pick up my background colour, which is the cream, float it across to the back, and then finish the stitch with my cream colour. And then I can just finish my last 3 stitches with my background colour. Okay, so that is pretty much it for like a basic level of colour work on crochet and using a grid. This specific design is super easy and it's very quick to work up. So if you are a pure beginner in crochet in general, and especially with colour work, try this one out definitely, because it's super quick and easy. Essentially now I'm just going to be working back and forth across, doing my rows as normal, and like I said, if you're right-handed, you might be doing different sections of the graph than I am, but it's still all the same basically. So you just need to pay attention to where you're starting, what corner of the graph you're starting at, and then from that point you can kind of mark what side you're starting from for each row. So I'm basically just going to carry on now until I've done my 8 rows of work, and then after my 8th row I'm just going to chain one and fasten off. Now since I don't need this black yarn anymore, I'm just going to cut it. I'm going to leave enough yarn at the back that we can weave in. Once I've done that 8th row, it's all complete. So I've already done my other 2 designs, but I did just want to kind of go over everything for you so that when you do eventually move on to these little bit more difficult designs, you are fully equipped to do it. This one here, the mushrooms, I would say is the next kind of step up from the deer. It's not really that more difficult. I would just say that because there are sort of thin stems down here, it's a little bit more switching, but apart from kind of a bit more colour changes, I would say that it is definitely doable, and like I said, it's a very small panel, so it's going to work up quite quickly. And then this larger one, which is the blackberries, is probably the most difficult of the 3, but I still try to keep it beginner friendly. So this one's just slightly bigger, and I'm going to have the dimensions of each on the screen. And this one involves a little bit more colour work, I would say, a little bit more detail. And I just wanted to go over the sections kind of over here and here, where you have colours that are actually sitting on the edge versus your background colour. So what you would do is you would locate, when you get to that row, where your final stitch is here would be black. You can see that the one above it is going back to the background colour, and this means that you would simply just change colours as normal, but you need to do so on the edge as well. So you would start your final stitch in black and you would finish it with green so that you can start the stitch above it in your background colour, if that makes sense. Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, well, this doesn't really look like a deer, and that's fine because we're now going to be doing kind of like a detailed stitching kind of embroidery section, and I'm going to be using the back stitch, and it's essentially kind of like a running stitch, except you join the running stitches together versus having them kind of dotted apart from each other. And this is going to basically create that deer shape that we want. So you can kind of see like the head shape over here forming, but I really want to separate these sections out so that we can really get good detail on it. And I've got a diagram on screen for the crochet graph with the back stitch, and then I'm also going to link the cross stitch graphs with the back stitch as well. So I'm basically at each kind of point I am following a sort of stitch line, if that makes sense. So they kind of sit on top of the squares, and some kind of go across the squares down here and then downwards. So I'm just going to start at any point, and I'm going to show on the graph exactly what point I'm starting at, and then you guys can follow along if you want to start there as well, or you can start somewhere else, but it doesn't really matter where you start. So I've just got some embroidery thread, and I've got like this dark brown colour. You can use black if you want to, or a different colour. So this is the one I'm going to use, and I'm just going to start by pushing my needle from the back to the front into that top corner space where the ear would be, so right there. You see right there? I'm just going to push my needle through there and pull through. Okay, so once you have pulled through, we're then going to go kind of one row below, straight down into the next sort of loop right below the next stitch hole, right down there. So we're just kind of doing like a vertical line, and then the next one next to it is going to go across, and this is where we're going to start the back stitch. So the back stitch essentially jumps ahead a stitch, and you pull your needle through there, and then you loop it back to connect to where we just finished. So I'm going to do this diagonal line right down here. So I'm pushing my needle through to this section here, going across, and I'm going to pull through, and then I'm going to bring it back up to that spot where we just pulled the yarn through and made that vertical line right there. So you've got something like that. So now, as you can see, my next stitch is going to just go one row below, so I'm going to jump ahead to basically where I want the stitch to technically end and pull through, and then I'm going to join it up back to the line that we're making. So just push that through like that. So there you've got another kind of line connected, and then I'm going to go diagonally across from that point, and this is going to start carving out the face. So I'm going to go diagonally all the way down here and pull through, and then I'm going to go back up to that original spot and pull through like that. And then I'm going to go across one stitch to kind of join the next bit up and pull through, and then I'm going to go back across to connect it. And then I'm going to jump up to the next bit, pull through, and then go back down to connect it. I'm basically just following this all the way around until the head part has been carved out, so that we've got a bit of a clearer picture of the actual deer. So I just stitched all the way back around kind of to shape the head out, and then I would just basically continue doing each section. And the picture that I've given you guys is really just a guide, you do not have to follow it exactly. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to carve out each section first, and then I'm going to go over it a second time so that the yarn, the embroidery thread can be a little bit darker and kind of pop a bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do the borders or the frames. So you're going to want to take whatever colour you want to use for your frames. So I'm going to take the green. So for the first frame design, I'm just going to take my main colour that I want to use, make a slip knot, and I'm going to be starting in the top corner. If you're right-handed, start in the top right, but I'm left-handed, so I'll start in the top left. And I'm just going to push my hook through the first front loop. So just the front loop only, and then I'm going to pull my slip knot through, and I'm going to do the exact same first row for all of the frames. So I'm pulling the slip knot through that front loop, and for the first row I'm going to work through the front loop only, and I'm going to chain one to start the first stitch, which is going to count as a slip stitch, and then into the next front loop I'm going to do a slip stitch, and same into the next front loop, and into the next front loop, and so on. I'm going into each front loop all the way around the border of the frame, doing a slip stitch. Then when you get to the side edge, you can just grab pretty much any loop from the side and count that as your front loop versus an actual stitch. So once you've reached the other side, you can then slip stitch back into that first chain one that you made. That counts as a slip stitch, and this is just going to finish the round like this. Okay, so that is the step one for all of the frames you're going to make, and step two is the same as well. So I'm just going to chain one to start my next row, and I'm just basically going to do a single crochet into the same stitch like that, and then into each stitch all the way around the border. So literally just going into the both loops of the next green stitch. That. Weave these tails in as I go. I'm just doing one single crochet into each stitch. Okay, so once you get to the other side, you then just want to do 2 single crochets into the next stitch, which is going to be at the corner. So you want to make sure that in each corner you've got 2 single crochets going on. So at the beginning we just did single crochets. We're going to do 2 here, then work 1 single crochet down until we get to this corner, and then do 2 around here, go across and do the same thing in this corner, work back up, and then once we reach that final one I'm going to do 2 single crochets there. You don't need to count your stitches, it does not need to be exact, just kind of place them roughly in each corner. So after those final 2 single crochets in the corner, you're going to slip stitch back into the first single crochet, and then after this, if you want, you can do more rows of single crochet. So you would just chain 1 and make a single crochet in the same stitch, and then single crochet all the way around, doing 2 single crochets in each corner if you want to make the border thicker and you want to just do like a plain frame. If not, we can start the first design of the 3. So the first design is very simple. It's basically going to be like a scalloped edge. So I'm just going to chain 1, and I'm going to start off by doing two half double crochets into the same stitch. Like that. And then I'm going to skip the next stitch, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next stitch. Like that. So you should have kind of like a little bump. And then you want to repeat that sequence again. So 2 half double crochets into that same stitch, and that is the same stitch where we just made that slip stitch. And then you want to skip the next stitch and make a slip stitch in the following stitch. Okay, so I'll do that one more time. 2 half double crochets in the same stitch, skip the next stitch and then slip stitch into the next stitch. And you just want to repeat that all the way around. So the next one is going to be like a floral design. So I'm going to start off by doing a chain 1 and a single crochet into the first stitch. And then I'm going to chain 3 and I'm going to slip stitch into the same stitch. Like that. And then I'm going to single crochet into the next stitch, and I'm going to chain 5 and I'm going to slip stitch into that same stitch, and then I'm going to single crochet into the next stitch, and I'm going to once again chain 3 and I'm going to slip stitch into that same stitch. So you should have kind of like these 3 small little loops across. And then you can just make 2 single crochets, so 1 into the next 2 stitches, and then that gives you a little bit of space before you do the next one. So into the next stitch I'm going to do a single crochet to start the sequence, and then I'm going to chain 3 and then I'm going to slip stitch into that same stitch. And then into the next stitch I'm going to single crochet and I'm going to chain 5. And then I'm going to slip stitch into that same stitch where I just made the chain 5. And then I'm going to make a single crochet into the next stitch, and I'm going to chain 3 and then slip stitch into that same stitch. Okay, so that is your sequence all the way around, and it gives you this nice kind of floral border going around that's quite nice. So for the final design of the border, I'm going to show you how to make this really cute mesh frame. So I'm going to basically start off by doing 2 rows of the single crochet border. So I just did an extra row after the previous one. So I just did this exact same thing, 2 single crochets in each corner, and 1 single crochet into each stitch across the edges. So I've just basically done 2 rows to make it a little bit thicker. And then for your next row you're going to make a chain 1 and single crochet into the same stitch, like that. And then you're going to chain 3 and you're going to skip the next stitch and then make a single crochet in the following stitch. And you want to chain 3 again, skip the next stitch and then make a single crochet into the following stitch. And I'm just going to repeat this all the way around. So just chaining 3, skipping the next stitch and single crocheting into the next stitch. And like I said before, if you get to the end and you can't really repeat the pattern, you could just skip that part. So maybe just do a chain 3 and then slip stitch back into the single crochet. Okay, so I just basically had a little bit of an extra few stitches, so instead of doing another single crochet here, I just decided to skip 2 stitches right at the end and then just single crocheted into that single crochet at the beginning to kind of close the round. So it doesn't really matter, you don't need to make it exact, but as long as you just kind of are able to kind of make it even. So yeah, I'm going to chain 1 again, and I'm going to make another single crochet into that same spot, like that. And now I'm just going to do 3 single crochets into each chain space, and I'm going to be skipping these single crochets here. So I'm just finding the next chain space right here, and I'm going to do 3 single crochets, like that. And then I'm going to skip this single crochet and I'm just going to go right into the next chain space with another 3 single crochets. And I'm just repeating that all the way around, skipping all of these single crochets in the row below and just doing 3 single crochets into each chain space. Okay, so once you have reached that final chain space, you then just want to slip stitch back into that first single crochet that we made, like that. And this is what your frame should look like so far. And this is the final row of the frame. We're going to chain 1 again, and we're going to make a single crochet in the same stitch, like that. And then we're going to start our sequence. So we're going to do a single crochet and a half double crochet into the next stitch. And then we're going to chain 3. We're going to turn the work to the back and we're going to go into these back bumps, and I'm going into the second back bump and doing a slip stitch, and then into the third back bump I'm going to do that second slip stitch, like that. And then we're going to skip the next stitch, and in the following stitch we're going to do a half double crochet and then a single crochet. And then for the final part of our sequence we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, like that. So you should create this kind of like pointy part of the frame. And now we're going to repeat that sequence. So we're going to start off with a single crochet and a half double crochet into the next stitch. And then we're going to chain 3. And then we're going to slip stitch into the second back bump and the third back bump. And then we're going to skip the next stitch, and in the following stitch do a half double crochet and a single crochet. And then into the next stitch we're going to slip stitch. Okay, so now I'm just going to repeat the sequence all the way around the frame. So like I said, I'm just going to repeat this now all the way around, and if I get to the end and there's kind of like an awkward space of stitches, I'm just going to skip those and I'm going to slip stitch straight into that single crochet. So just see how your stitches look once you get to the end kind of area. If you can do another one then that's great. If you can't and there's maybe like just 2 left, just skip them and slip stitch straight into that single crochet. And then once you have done that, you have completed the frame. You can just chain 1 and fasten off. And that is pretty much everything for all of these frames. So now I'm just going to do all of the frames as I want them, and then I'm going to come back and show you the final result of the picture frames. So the way that I attached these was I grabbed some masking tape and I kind of rolled it so that I had some of these sticky edges going onto the back of the frame, and then I was able to just push them onto the wall. And I did use a little bit more masking tape for the larger frame, but it held on just fine, and this is what the final result looks like. So I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like me to make next, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!